I'm very happy that you agreed. One of them is now I have a chance to see you. We've corresponded a lot, but we haven't really seen each other on Skype or Zoom or something like that. You know, why don't we begin? And let me begin with just a brief introduction. Two kinds of introductions. So one is this group that you're speaking with in the colloquium. I wrote to you about AMMACHI Labs and the Center for Women Equality and Women Empowerment and Gender Equality. And I sent you a few clips about it, so about both places. So do it this way. India, over 1 billion people. Kerala, which is one of the states. Within Kerala, there's Amrita University, which is part of, there's an ashram. The ashram has Amrita University. Within Amrita University are these two groups. The main spiritual guide, is Amma, and I sent you information about her as well. And the people who are attending this colloquium, it's a weekly colloquium with really outstanding scientists and speakers. They're PhD students and faculty members. So it's the usual thing in that respect. What's unusual is the people who are here in the combination of people from the computer sciences, from engineering, from the sciences, sort of the hard sciences, and then there may be soft sciences, the social sciences, and the questions that you'll be getting will have a different kind of a flavor, I think, than the usual ones when you present to social science types. So that's, and the work that's being done here is by and large around helping women in villages, remote villages, attain skills which will allow them to be gainfully employed with all the social ramifications of what that means to the family, what it means to a village, things of that nature. And that's the main, I would say, the main thrust of the work. So it's producing objects, computer programs, whatever, to train people so that they'll have skills and knowledge, as I said, that will allow them to be employed. And now, let me introduce Francesca to the people who are gathered here. So, and I thought about it. I was trying to figure out, when did we first meet? And the truth is, I think I remember, but one of the nice things about not knowing when you met somebody for the first time is that you get a sense that you've known the person forever. And that's a nice feeling in your case for me. So I think I met Francesca for the first and possibly the only time in Erice, in Sicilia, in a meeting, a smallish meeting that's held every year there. And I was really taken by the topic she talked about, her understanding of not just the topic, but many topics surrounding it, and then many topics surrounding what surrounds it, and deep knowledge, and an infectious personality. And yeah, and one of the things I remember was a conversation we had over dinner with like about 40 people, and she's sitting next to me, and I told her about some of my experiences at the OECD, which were pretty humorous. And she was one of the, in the education section within the OECD, Francesca is way up there. So she knows what's going on, and she knows all the people who are involved in the story that I told. And I thought I had some influence over something. And I told her that only later on did I understand that it actually had to do with then President Bush and Putin made a decision about something where Israel was brought into the decision in order to help out Israel for something. I thought I actually did something until afterwards I found out what my role wasn't and how things really got done. And Francesca knew the whole story and how it happened, etc. So we're going to have a big treat. Francesca is working the OECD. You got the bio about her. And now you'll see why it is that she got to the place where she got at OECD. And not only at OECD, she has a professorship which basically allows her to be a professor anywhere in England, if I understand it correctly. So she's like a traveling professor and sells her wares as she goes from place to place. But there are very few people who have been awarded a professorship of that type. Francesca is one of them, and not just by chance. So Francesca, thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us. And we're all very much looking forward to it. The topic is, I wrote it down, practice, a randomized field study. No, okay. She's gonna be talking to us. Oh, it's the other one. Okay. She's gonna talk about, she'll tell you what she's gonna be talking about.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you so much for the introduction. I said at the beginning that I like the bar to be set low so that I can exceed expectations, and you totally ruined that. My big memory of Sid was particularly bonding upon cream made with pomegranates. I have a very unhealthy passion for pomegranates, and Israel is one of the places where you can really get the real stuff. So I'll share my screen if I manage, and today, rather than talk about what Sid thought I was going to talk about, given the audience, I thought I would talk about a very new paper. In fact, I couldn't share the paper because it doesn't exist yet. I prepared this presentation for this group on an application of the computer log files that are stored when you take computer-based tests like standardized tests that are delivered on computers. What happens in that context is that, in a sense, test takers leave traces of the interaction with the computer delivery platform, and that information can be used to understand some of the behavior that test takers do when they take a test. So the title of the talk is "Do Gamers Read Instructions and Does It Matter?" And you will see the connection with cognitive testing or testing that goes on in schools to understand things like literacy proficiency or numeracy proficiency or science proficiency. And I must say that this is joint work with a colleague from the OECD, Francesco Avvisati. We are in a situation in which I hope everyone is safe and well and keeping okay also mentally with COVID-19. And the topic of video gaming came to mind while we were struggling with our kids playing way too much video games or not enough, depending on what we think. But already before the pandemic, video gaming was a favorite leisure time activity among teenagers and has been since the 1970s. In Italy, we had a super big storm in 1985, and I remember I was at school. Schools closed for 2 weeks, and my father had just come back from a trip to the States, and I had this Nintendo Donkey Kong things that nobody would recognize as video games today, but I was hooked for the 2 weeks. What we do think is that video gaming increased during the pandemic. We don't have necessarily solid data, although there is a lot of sales data and the number of people watching online streaming platforms. But what we tried to do as a fun exercise was looking at Google Trend searches worldwide between January 2018 and June 2020. And how different video gaming related searches performed over this period. And what you see here is that, well, there's generally worldwide a spike around Christmas time, the red areas. November, when there is Black Friday in the US, and now it has been exported everywhere, or people who buy Christmas presents way in advance, big spike there, another big spike for the late comers like myself at Christmas. And then there is a smaller spike, the green bits, that corresponds to preparation for summer holidays in the Northern Hemisphere. People are searching for things to do for their kids, or the kids themselves are searching to nag their parents on what they would like for the summertime. And this is what happened this year. This is when the pandemic first hit in Europe, the United States, and then everywhere else. And as you can see, it's as if there was an additional Christmas. Now, interestingly, looking at the countries that I travel regularly, Italy, United Kingdom, and France, the spike in searches really matched when lockdowns were introduced. So in the United Kingdom, things happened later. And as you can see, also baking went up. This is what people were doing while staying at home. In Italy, sorry, no much baking. We know how to cook, so no spike there, but definitely there was a spike in terms of what happened going up right at the when lockdowns were introduced in Italy. And oops, sorry. And here is France and what happened there. One thing as I'm talking, I'll try to, I don't know what's your usual way of dealing with things in terms of responding to questions on the chat. Probably, if you have any substantive questions or you would like me to stop.
Recommended number of hours per credit.
Typically, we wait to have, I mean, people enter their questions into the chat, and then we wait to have them have like a more question and answer type session towards the end.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yes, because I saw that there were a couple of questions or comments, but I was getting distracted. So
you can just ignore the chat for now, and then I'll mediate towards the end. Okay,
perfect. But if there are questions on progress, just let me know. So what is our contribution? As I said at the beginning, what we try to do is what we want to see is if the people who engage in gaming adopt the same problem-solving strategies that they adopt in gaming sessions when they have to solve cognitive tasks in educational assessment situation. And we observe these strategies through the interaction that test takers engage in when they solve tests delivered on a computer, and in particular when they solve tasks that are dynamic in nature, so that tasks that require an interaction between the test taker and the platform in order to be solved. we also ask if gamers benefit or face an academic penalty as a result. And we do focus on a domain where transfer is plausible, and that's science. And finally, and of interest to this group, we consider if the association between gaming and the adoption of different strategies differs for boys and girls. In a sense, the work that we're doing could be interesting for the group in terms of what Sid detailed as the mission, by considering the fact that, well, I'm Italian, and there is this saying that all roads take you to Rome. I don't think that's necessarily true. Not all roads take you to the same place, but actually you can get to Rome through providing a solution in a cognitive test through different roads, and knowing what those roads are, and you know the places you traveled and how you got to where you are, which is providing a solution to a task in a cognitive test, enables us to have an idea of where you come from and what your baseline proficiencies and what you know and what you don't know. So far, when we look at in the academic community, when we look at standardized tests, we only look at whether people provide a correct answer or an incorrect answer. But knowing if somebody gives a correct or an incorrect answer doesn't tell you much about how they reason, and doesn't tell you much about why they're getting things wrong, which means we know very little about how to help people gain skills. Good teachers do that, but that's one teacher at a time, one classroom at a time. If there were a way to actually do this on a much grander scale, I think there would be a lot of benefits. So video games, there are a lot of very different games, and we have little information in the data that we use to characterize the games that people engage in. But one thing that a lot of video games have in common is that making mistakes and exploring the problem space that is inherent in the game is actually what gaming is about. It allows gamers to understand the rules of the game, to simulate alternative scenarios, to test hypotheses about the functioning of the game and the effectiveness of different gaming strategies. Should I get a sword? Should I take that turn? Should I construct something? So, sorry, go ahead. No. So really gaming is about the process of applying inductive discovery, which is the process through which you formulate hypotheses about the rules governing a situation by identifying patterns and implementing strategies in response to stimuli received. So in a sense, it's bottom up. You formulate hypotheses by observing the data that you have, and that's what happens in video gaming. This is pretty different from deductive discovery, which actually is about testing the validity of ex ante defined theories or rules with data and observations. That's much more about, okay, I have rules about how things should work. If I do follow the rule, does the outcome follow? That's inherently not what gaming is about. There are some similarities and differences between games and some of the tests that we use. Gaming are typically low stakes, and the tests we use in our work are also low stake. But there are also some differences. In particular, in gaming, what you do have is a potentially infinite round of iterations. You can, you make mistakes, you start back and you repeat until you really master the problem space, and then you can move on. Making mistakes is very much part of what gaming is about. And it's quasi open-ended. I mean, there are algorithms that define the problem space, but this is very, very wide. In the context of the tests that we use in our work, on the other hand, the participation is one-off. You have one one round of gaming, and then it's over. It's also time bound, like most tests in schools. You have a given amount and that's it. Problems are mostly static and are not open-ended, although that's not necessarily the case in the case of some interactive tests. So what we do want to see is if the strategy that people normally apply in gaming situations is transferred from the gaming situation into an educational situation, and in our case, that's taking part in a low-stake test. Indicators that we use to see this strategy of trying things out is not reading instructions properly, so jumping directly in the session. That's what we would expect gamers do. When you receive a new game, you're not there trying to find instructions. You start playing, making mistakes, and see how the game works. We think that people are going to try things out, so extensively exploring the problem environment, engaging in what we call the over-exploration of the problem space by harvesting information, doing many more actions than what would be efficient or expected to see really what the problem space is about in this cognitive test. And what we have in terms of ultimate outcome of performance, of accuracy, is a performance in what we call open-ended science tasks. There are interactive items that assess procedural knowledge. It's mostly about running sort of micro simulations. It's about, and I will show you some of the tasks. They're not particularly complex, but they do give you an idea of the type of interaction that there is. So the test that we use in our work is a program for international student assessment. For those of you who don't know what PISA, that's the acronym, stands for, it's a low-stake test that is administered to 15-year-olds every 3 years. And it's a 2-hour test that since 2015 has been delivered on computers. The test has components in text comprehension, reading skills, numeracy, mathematics skills, and science skills. And the aim of the test is really to go beyond the extent to which students know, for example, in the context of mathematics, how to do a quadratic equation or how to do a derivative, but rather how they can apply mathematical concepts or science concepts to solve real life situations. And precisely in that context, it's why the move to computer-based delivery was accompanied by a more extensive use of assessment tasks that are interactive, because that really allows you to have a bit more on the front of understanding the problem-solving nature of proficiency. So this is the stimulus for one of the science items. The PISA test is not publicly released, so most of the assessment items are confidential, and the reason for that is that they are reused in successive cycles, in part because building an item bank is very expensive, and in part because what the OECD wants to do, or countries that fund the OECD want to do, is to see how successive cohorts of 15-year-olds perform on a 3-year rolling cycle. But in order to do that, what you need to have is at least a core of assessment tasks that are repeated, so that you can use shifts in performance in those tasks and how they map onto the other assessment tasks in order to derive trends and in particular to construct linking items to get estimates. So what the test does is, in this context, there is somebody running in hot weather, and you want to make sure that the person doesn't have a heat stroke, doesn't become too dehydrated, and the mechanism through which that happens is by losing water through sweat. So the test taker can move these flashes in order to see when the person gets dehydrated or has a heat stroke as a function of air temperature. The hotter the temperature, the more likely and the sooner people get a heat stroke or get dehydrated. How much humidity there is, so people can move this flash, and if the person is drinking water. So essentially what the person needs to do is move the flashes, run essentially an experiment, and see what happens. Now, assuming linear, that there are no interactions, the person can just do a few things and see what happens. But somebody, for example, in the case of gamers, what we think is that people will do way too many iterations to see what happens in terms of results on this part of the screen, trying interactions, trying way too many temperatures, trying to weigh many humidity things, and trying perhaps all the possible interactions. So this would be an over-exploration in order to achieve the result, which in this case could be if there is a certain temperature outside and a given level of humidity, and the person doesn't drink any water, what happens to the person? Does the person get a heat stroke? Does the person get dehydrated? What happens? So rather than simply set things on the correct levels, run the simulation and see what happens, we think that the person may engage in way more iterations, in a sense, to play with the platform. This is just one example, and if you go on this link, I will share the presentation after. You can play with these things way more and other.
Francesca?
Yeah.
Is there a way of making this full screen so it'll be easier to read the text?
Yes. Sorry. But the link is difficult. I mean, as I say, I will just circulate this around. But this is okay. This is the stimulus. This is the problem space in the computer platform. This is the simulation area of the problem, and this is where you see the solutions of the simulations that people run. And here is the question that people saw. So what we observe is everything that in the log files, what we observe is every time somebody clicks on anything, we can see the result of that in the computer generated log files. So, and everything comes with a timestamp, so we know who did what, when, and how long that took. So as I said, in terms of data, we use data from the Program for International Student Assessment, 15-year-old students in secondary schools. We don't just have information on how well people did on the test, but we also have detailed background information in terms of demographic characteristics. In many countries, students also took part in what was an optional ICT questionnaire, which has detailed information on video gaming, although not that detailed once you start thinking about that. The assessment instrument was the computer-based test, and it's important to know that in the context of PISA, because the aim is not to rank students, but get an efficient estimate of proficiency at the system level, at the level of countries or population subgroups. Not every student, not all students are administered the exact same test questions. what is used is a matrix design, so that the overall pool of test questions is administered not at random, but with intention of maximizing the coverage of the intended domains, and at the same time have enough information to impute proficiency on items that an individual the test taker didn't take. The allocation of material was done randomly, and the computer-based delivery meant that in 2018 there was a lot more efficient allocation of testing material than in previous cycles that were paper-based, where you cannot, so to speak, scramble the material so much because it would become then administratively too difficult, or the potential problems in administration may exceed the benefits. The domains that we examine in this work are science and reading fluency. For the first time in PISA 2018, there was an assessment of the basic ability of students to process written text. That was borrowed from the adult skill assessments, but essentially it goes in the direction of how fast are you able to match, for example, a figure of a nose with the word nose, or a figure of a table with the word table, so that how fast can you process written information. In the context of adults with very low levels of reading proficiency, that's actually part of, some people get the answer wrong, but in the context of students, because it's important to consider that PISA only samples 15-year-old students, so people who at the age of 15 are still in school, very basic word recognition is generally not a problem. What the problem is how fast people process written material. In terms of what more detailed variables or indicators we use in the work, well, given that the work is about video gaming, we have a variable that indicates if the person, the test taker, is a daily video gamer, and it's an indicator that we identify by combining responses on the frequency through which an individual plays different games. Games that we fielded were one-player games, collaborative online games, and online games via social network, and responses could range from never or hardly ever to every day. The indicator takes value 1 if a student reported playing at least one type of game every day, or 2 or more games almost every day. So this is, I mean, we will try to get also analysis with alternative indicators, but this is what we did for today. In terms of controls, and also that we also look at as moderators, we have sex, which is reported by the student taking part in the study, as well as the administrative tracking form, so the form that is used for sampling. The number of years respondents use digital devices for, which is derived by considering how old the student reported being when he or she started using digital devices. We also look at science content knowledge, so the percentage of correct items in the science tests that are really about science knowledge rather than procedural knowledge. So for example, when is it that or what would be one, or give me the formulation of water or something like that. And then we have information on reading fluency or reading speed, which we construct using the within country percentile distribution in the amount of time that the respondent took to answer 22 reading fluency items, with 100 being the fastest and 0 being the slowest. Our key dependent variables are derived from 5 interactive science units in the PISA science assessment, and each unit contains several test items. If you remember the item back here, here is the stimulus. Here is one question. This is 1 out of 5 questions that uses this problem situation. And there were 5 of these situations that people were exposed to, and each situation, so to speak, had a number of questions, and having answered the previous question was not a precondition for solving the successive question. What we do look at is the time to first action, the amount of time elapsed between seeing a stimulus and then taking a first action, doing a first mouse click, so to speak, the amount of information harvesting, so the number of actions that an individual took before an answer was provided, and finally, accuracy, science performance, so the average of percentage correct answers in the interactive science items. We don't use 2015 data, although there were way more test items because the focus in 2015 was very much on science because there was no information on time to first action in the log files. So how many 15-year-olds play video games daily? And these are results pre-pandemic and it's very basic descriptive statistics for the countries covered in PISA. And unfortunately, I don't have any data for India for this year. So in most countries, there has been an increase in the amount of daily video gaming that occurs. And again, this is 2018, given the increase that we've seen. If you go back to 2009, between 2009 and 18, every year seems to be increasing, and it seems to be accelerating. But crucially, there are major differences across genders. Boys were way more likely and remain way more likely than girls to play video games. And even though both genders increased in the amount of video gaming, in fact, boys increased even more than girls between 2015 and 2018. Here are some descriptives in terms of number of observations, mean, standard deviation, and the mean among gamers and among non-gamers and difference. So on this sample item that I showed you, what you can see is that people took an average of, let's say, 20 actions and took around 21 seconds before they provided a first action, and only around 23% provided a correct answer. And here, as you can see, differences between gamers and non-gamers. Gamers tend to take more actions than non-gamers and tend to respond, to take a first action faster than non-gamers. They have slightly lower performance on this task than non-gamers. If you look at all the target items, and here it's percentiles, again, what you do see is that gamers are, so to speak, 3 percentiles above non-gamers in terms of the amount of information harvesting that goes on, and they tend to be 3 percentiles below in terms of time to first action. So they tend to be faster in responding. Not very many differences in terms of percentage correct on these items. In terms of reading fluency, so in terms of background characteristics that we control for, no differences in reading fluency in how fast gamers and non-gamers respond. A bit more in terms of baseline preferences for using digital devices or availability of digital devices. Gamers have more years of experience using digital devices. In terms of reading scores, gamers have lower reading scores than non-gamers, but that's pretty much explained by the fact that there are massive gender differences in who plays video games and who doesn't. And we do know that boys tend to have lower reading proficiency than girls. In terms of percentage correct on the content knowledge, on the knowledge component of science, there are no differences, and this reflects the prior evidence that there are no differences in science knowledge between the two groups. Now, regression results for the one unit that I showed you, these are the descriptives, so things are not very different, but when you also control for baseline characteristics, again, gamers are 1.6 seconds faster to provide a first answer. They engage in 1.3 more actions, and they tend to be less correct on that one science unit. When you look at all the different test tasks that we have, what you do see is that gamers tend to be faster than non-gamers. Confirmed in terms of information harvesting, they engage in more exploration than non-gamers. But in terms of performance, things are not different. So in a sense, they take a different way of approaching the problem. I mean, findings are not huge in terms of effect sizes, but they are informative. But in terms of arriving at a solution, they arrive at the correct solution at the same amount or to the same degree as non-gamers. So they do take slightly different roads using the metaphor that I used at the beginning to get to Rome, but they all get to the same place eventually. In terms of effects by country, when you go country-specific, sample size goes down quite a bit. So you have a lot of non-statistically different results from zero, and you have a bit of variability in terms of size of the effect, which in any case is not huge. So here it's time to first action, distribution by country, and this is information harvesting in terms of number of actions. What we found interesting was interaction with gender. So here, what we do see is that boys in general are way faster than girls. Boys in general explore more the problem space, and there are no gender differences in terms of science performance, which again is a usual finding in PISA. However, all the interactions between gender and gaming are significant. And what you do see is that boy gamers compared to boy non-gamers are only marginally faster, but girls gamers are way faster than girls non-gamers. In terms of information harvesting, we see an actual big effect in terms of differences by gender of gaming. Boy gamers engage in even more information harvesting than boys in general, while the effect for girls is much smaller. And we do think that this difference in terms of what does gaming do to boys and girls leads to a difference in terms of percentage correct, in terms of accuracy between boy gamers and boy non-gamers, and between girls gamers and girls non-gamers. When boys game, they actually, they actually are more correct than boys who do not game, possibly because they compensate their not reading instructions and going directly in the session by over-exploring the problem space. By contrast, because the big difference for girls is how fast they engage in a session rather than read instructions, but they don't engage to the same extent in this information harvesting practice, in acquiring information from the system, their performance is actually going down. In terms of other findings, what we do see is that people who have greater science knowledge perform better, and people who have who are faster readers, they are more correct. So in terms of summary findings, gaming is associated with certain behavioral tendencies. Gamers have a faster transition into action, and they do engage in this inductive, deductive process by engaging in more extensive information harvesting than non-gamers. Performance doesn't seem to vary after accounting for potential confounders. Faster readers have faster transitions into actions and more extensive information harvesting. And people who access digital devices at a younger age have faster transitions and more extensive information harvesting. And finally, better knowledge means that you have slower transitions into action and lower information harvesting. I think that differences by gender are actually quite important and significant. They do suggest that boys and girls may approach interactive science items slightly differently. Boys have faster transitions into actions than girls, and they do harvest more information than girls, and these are the main effects. But among gamers, the gender gap in time to first action is reduced, but, and that's the crucial bit, probably for performance, the gender gap in information harvesting is even larger. So how does our result or this line of research plays out in the broader literature on the effects of gaming on learning? I do think that there are two separate, so to speak, lines of work on the effect of gaming. One is looking at indirect displacement effects, looking at whether gamers have poor physical health, suffer from isolation, poor psychosocial health. And at the root of all these studies is the fact that indirect effects are perceived to be more negative because they substitute for engagement in activities that would be or either less negatively associated with physical health or isolation or psychosocial health, or activities like doing exercise that will lead to better outcomes. So even if they have no association whatsoever, gaming with these outcomes, it's the substitution effect that makes a difference. But this means that inherently indirect effects are, so to speak, relative. If we think about how gaming has been perceived before COVID, the World Health Organization was saying, well, video game addiction is officially considered a mental health disorder, and a lot of negative publications on this. Well, during the COVID-19 pandemic, people said, well, you know, it's a healthy social pastime during the pandemic, which allows kids to remain in touch with friends and, so to speak, to engage in something, and it's not so bad after all. So it really depends on what the alternative is. In 2019, somebody who spends the entire day playing video games on the couch was was not necessarily seen as a good person or with nice moral connotations. In 2020, when everyone was asked to remain home, it was actually seen as a responsible adult. What about, on the other hand, the direct effect of gaming? Are gaming powerful learning environments, as some people say, or are they actually having negative behavioral tendencies, as some others say, leading to aggressiveness, lack of attention, and short attention spans? So, I mean, the debate in this context is very much about how transferable or task-specific some of the effects of engaging in learning are to different situations. And what we do see is that there are behavioral tendencies, there are common in gaming, and that do appear to transfer in non-gaming situations that share many of the features of gaming. However, different games may have different effects. For example, the gender differences that we observe may not have anything to do with girls or boys' responses, but simply with the different types of games that girls and boys may engage in. The other thing that we haven't seen or we haven't analyzed yet, but we do want to see, is if there's a difference between, I said that there are several so to speak, environments, several stimuli, and what we would like to see if the over-exploration or some of these behavioral tendencies are especially apparent at the beginning of the test, when people need, so to speak, to learn the problem space. But then once they understand how things work, in a sense, there is a fading out of the over-exploration, and in a sense, once people have understood the rules of the game, then they can just switch and apply the same rules afterwards. And we haven't done that. We have a number of limitations. Definitely the independent variable is at the moment very crude, and at the moment we cannot distinguish between different types of information harvesting. So what we've done is we have looked at the overall number of actions, but what we could do is actually look at the type of actions that people do. Are they doing more of the same rather than doing different actions? Are they simply playing with the platform, or are they exploring? The difference between checking for the fifth linearity, so to speak, exploration versus an interaction, for example. And I do think that in general this work, and the reason why I thought it was worth presenting, is just an application of a broader line of work that could be done using, in this case, public and generic log type of information that are available when tests are done on a computer, by uncovering differences in the process of how students solve problems, rather than the usual information that people have relied on, which is, do they solve the problem or not? And I do think that in general, I would expect that there are important differences in how people get to a solution across groups, whether that's gender, gamers, or countries, and that this sometimes may be larger than actually differences found in performance. Between genders, we don't see differences in science performance or science achievement in the context of the PISA test, but we do see differences in how people actually get to solutions. This is just to say that, yes, ultimately, I do believe that playing is an important component of success. I may not be good at keeping my mouth shut, but definitely play is a good idea. And with this, I close. And I would be happy to answer questions or things like that.
Thank you so much. So we have several questions. Sriram, why don't we start with yours about the indicators? Do you want to go ahead?
I can also read the question out loud in case.
Sure, we can start with that. We can try it that way.
These indicators based on a set of actions defined by researchers for the purpose of the study. In other words, what is generalizability of these indicators? No, in the sense that these are, as I said at the end, which probably obviously was not clear at the beginning. What we use are the generic public use log files that were released by the Program for International Student Assessment. So these are all the indicators are available to researchers everywhere. So it was an attempt to show what can be done even without going into very detailed log files, the raw data that are available for research purposes, but that needs to be approved on a country-by-country basis. So the indicators were defined ex ante by the OECD and the testing agency. So they were not specifically developed for this study. In terms of actions, as I say, what would be interesting to do, but that would require going beyond the public use files, is to actually look at, and then the issue is there is an element of subjectivity in coding the different actions that people take, but we haven't done that.
Maybe Sriram can just ask all of these questions together because there's questions.
Bhavani Chechi, you weren't audible. Can you repeat that?
Okay, I can ask the question and give my an answer. Can she?
Maybe Sriram can. He's written so many questions, so I was thinking maybe he can just ask all his questions together, so it maybe makes sense. He's working directly on gaming, so that's probably.
Bhavani, we can't hear you well. It sounds like you've been smoking too much.
So,
what I understood is, Sriram, if you can ask all of your questions at once, that would be helpful because you have so many. And then he's working directly with gaming and designing games and social games for socials. So
okay.
Oh, sure. Okay, I didn't understand. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. I was also wondering about the indicators, whether we could generalize it, use it for, let's say, other studies and in other contexts. The indicators that you used for this study, can it be used for, used in other domains, and how generalizable are these indicators?
So, I mean, yeah, they are available for other domains, and they are generally the type of indicators that all the large-scale assessments are moving towards. So I do think that for the interactive science units, I would say the beauty is that there is a lot of interaction. So you can see there is a lot of potential variability. For other things, the opportunity for exploring meaningfully the problem space is much smaller. But at the same time, these are the types of indicators that will become available for the second cycle of the program for assessment of adults in 2022. They are the types of indicators that are available for 10-year-olds in the context of the Progress for International Reading Literacy, PROLS, and they are the types of indicators that will become available in the context of mathematics and science in teams. So I do think these types of indicators are in fact, and as I say, it's more on the log file and the timing and the exploration bit, are the ones that are going to be available on a public release nature more generally, now that a lot of the large-scale assessments are moving to computer. So in that context, I think those indicators may be, in a sense, not complete, and they leave a lot of blanks, but they are very useful because they are the types of indicators that will become standard along with information on accuracy. Now, we do want to repeat, I see your other question on this data were based on the 2018 study, and we would like to see at the very least something with 2015, although we will not be able to look at time to first action, precisely to see within country what happens in terms of now that we're getting marginals, so we get more people in every cycle. We did control for socioeconomic background, so that was another question from Bhavani. I haven't shown the results, but in every, I mean, I guess it's in PISA, that's always standard. So we have controlled for an overall indicator that looks at socioeconomic status, containing parental educational attainment, parental occupational status, and finally availability of economic and cultural and educational resources, as well as durables within the home. On 21 hours as being the definition for weekly, we actually looked at other things in terms of excessive gaming with 6 or more hours per day, which over a week period would give you an even higher threshold. And that's really where things start to go very, very bad in terms of actual performance.
And then, Srividya, do you want to explain your question a bit? Or did she answer it?
Yeah, I think she just addressed it.
Okay.
It was regarding the socioeconomic background.
But the question, the part I was curious about is the access to digital devices itself.
So I mean, if you don't have, so in a sense, the control for how old were you when you first accessed digital devices is indirectly tapping into that. If you never had a digital device, then that value is age 15, now that you're taking the test on a computer, and the number of years you have been using a digital device for is going to be 0.
Bhavani had mentioned or had asked this question about repercussions to immediate action that could be a reason why girls may be slower. Is there any, do you have any information on, I don't know if she can be heard. So I'm just gonna read the question.
In terms, no, there are no, yeah, it's a low stake. So there's absolutely no consequence for test takers, and in fact not only it doesn't have a repercussion in terms of marks, but the kids don't know how well they did, and their teachers don't know how well the kid did, so there's actually no information given. It has zero consequence for the student. Now, that may actually, in terms of gender differences, that may be, so to speak, a problem in and of itself, because I mean, this is other work that I've been doing, and I hope to have a paper on that out soon. But males do tend to be way more extrinsically motivated than girls. So the issue that you raise in terms of girls being a bit more careful, slower in that context, that may be true. It may be true in the sense of the way in which girls are motivated by the situation in and of itself and exert maximum effort is different than boys. What we do see in terms of a performance on a long test, and that may be giving you a little bit of an indication of that, is that the PISA test is 2 hours, so it's a rather long test, and performance tends to decline over the course of the test because people get tired on long cognitive tests. But the decline in performance for girls is way gentler. Let's say they don't lose so much in accuracy as time goes by, while boys' performance tend to go down more significantly. Now, recent work that I've done seems to suggest that it's because they tend to go much faster. So it's not that they totally disengage from the test. What happens is that per unit of time, they tend to become more efficient. They get higher accuracy, but they just really can't take the test anymore. They get really, really frustrated with being sitting in front of the test for very long.
Sword, you have a bunch of questions. Do you want to ask yours? I don't know if he's there anymore. Well, maybe there aren't so much questions as comments now that I'm reading them.
I mean, on perpetrating violence, I really don't know. To be honest, I do think more than anything, the issue of if, and here I'm not claiming necessarily causality, but if more and more people are not reading instructions, maybe they were already doing that, but now this is becoming more apparent if people are playing video games. If that's the case, then, or in general, let's compare boys and girls. One of the big problems in many countries is that boys' performance in school assessments tends to be lower than girls. So girls tend to do better once and if they are in school. Maybe it's not because boys don't know anything or are not prepared or don't have the skills. Maybe it's because they're not listening, particularly during the teenage years. They're not listening to the teachers and they're not reading instructions. Now, we may want to, from an educational perspective, we may want to, so to speak, have ideal children in front of us, but that's not how the world works. So on the one hand, we may want to get the boys to understand the importance of reading instructions, particularly in the long run. That will definitely be beneficial. But at the same time, teachers need to be aware that boys are currently not reading instructions. So in a sense, maybe read instructions out loud for tests beforehand, or adopting different strategies so that, in a sense, they can really monitor what the kids in front of them know and can do, so that they can provide instruction to ensure that they reach educational objectives that they haven't met yet. And while this example, in a sense, applies more to boys, I'm sure that there are many more that apply to girls. And so again, the idea here is to say, okay, if we go beyond simply do kids are getting responses right or wrong, we can try to understand some of these features. Now, it has always been possible to do this. You know, when you ask kids to solve a problem, rather than simply input the solution, teachers could see how people reason by looking at how they solve the problem on paper. But it's a rather time-consuming and difficult process to manage, and it inherently doesn't spill over beyond the individual teacher, individual classroom. The advantage of computer-based testing is that you can actually put that onto scale, and you can do that way more efficiently, particularly if the test items, and I think that's where a lot of innovation hasn't gone into yet, is if you define items so that they are really encouraging people to interact with the platform, and this interaction is designed so that it can have value in terms of understanding the problem-solving process and the cognitive processes that are going on. So if you design items in order to exploit the interaction with the delivery platform, you can get way more and way better information than what is currently available, which is simply, in a sense, an opportunistic use ex post of what happens simply by default when you have computer-based testing.
Sora had some questions.
Hi, Francesca, that was wonderful, really interesting. Couple of questions. Admittedly, I'm a gamer in a sense. Well, I'm 47, so not much time for doing that. So one thing that was kind of interesting for me is that that simulation doesn't look like a game in the real sense of a game. It's more like a video interaction lesson. Well, games were used as a learning settings medium for a long time, way before video games ever came to cross. You know, we teach the ABC with games, with songs, with whatever. I was wondering if you think that games in general, your results will carry on to like just, you know, board games or social games or anything that it has nothing to do with video. In a sense, the real video games are actually designed to keep you playing. These are malicious people, and they do whatever they can to keep the person onto the screen, rather than like those simulations, which are, you know, as I said, not really, I don't even know if I should call it a game, but it's very similar to, for me, to the real flight simulators, in which, for example, you have no way of starting without reading the instructions. There's just no way of doing it if it's a serious game. So there's so many levels to that, and so let me focus on the question. The question is, do you think this is a gaming thing? Your results, video or not video, or is it just, you know, specific to video games and all that?
I do think it's a game thing rather than video game, and that's actually why play, so to speak, is so pervasive, and it would be great if it were used a bit more in education. I mean, it is used to a degree, but I don't know if any of you have seen the work by another Italian in Florence, Stefano Mancuso, who actually looks at how new plants play. So he says, well, the beauty and intelligence of plants, because new buds actually play, because play is the way in which, as I said at the very beginning, we understand through a data-driven approach the rules governing a situation, rather than start off with ex-ante theories about how the world works. That's way more enjoyable. That's cognitively how people like to learn new things, and that's how they actually store that information in long-term memory. So I do think inherently it's a less boring. I mean, one of the things I really want to do more work on is boredom, which is a huge problem in schools. And why is that? Well, because I actually like boredom. It does tell you that you're not satisfied with the current situation, but at the same time, you're not catatonic. You are engaged. You do want to have meaning. And one way in which you reach for meaning is by having agency over what you do. And one way in which kids can have agency, and let's remember that children have very little agency in their lives. They have teachers who tell them what to do. They have parents who tell them what to do. I'm a parent, so I mean, I know that my role is that, but from a kid's perspective, they do want to have agency. And play is actually one of the ways in which they're not told the rules, but they actually can discover the rules. So more play would be if done in a good way, and that requires so much more on the part of teachers, because in a sense they relinquish the power that they inherently have when they are the teachers, and we tell you what's right and what's the underlying principle, and they really need to be sure about their own knowledge. Otherwise, they find themselves in trouble, not being able to guide the gaming situation. But I do think that there is an inherently learning and very powerful I would say component in gaming, and so results are not necessarily simply about video games.
So in a sense, you feel that gamification, as it's called, and it's used for across the board, not even for kids, all over the place, for adults as well. Gamification is an approach that can help.
I do think it can help with caveats. I mean, as everything, quality matters. And I do think that rather than it actually, as I said at the end, I do think it requires even more in terms of preparation and knowledge and etc. on the part of teachers and on the part of instructors. So it's in a sense the frontal teaching, where you do not have any gaming whatsoever, is actually easier if you have rather unprepared people, because you can rely on very established guidelines and structures. So in a sense, if your human capital is very, very poor, that kind of structure compensates for a lot of the lack of preparation that you may have. On the other hand, if you do have very engaged, well-prepared teachers that are trained in terms of using gaming as a learning tool, that can be wonderful. So I do think I'm not overall convinced that it's great in every situation, but it can be way more powerful in certain contexts.
Yeah, I understand. There should be probably some study saying how fast we learn using that approach and the regular, class lecture approach. It's obviously more fun, but I'm not sure if more efficient.
Well, the issue is also for how long, because I do think a problem with testing is that we tend to test at a very short elapsed time between when the class is delivered and the material is used in a very fictitious kind of context. So the issue is maybe
I don't remember anything.
Yeah, maybe I have lower performance in the immediate, but what happens 4, 5, 6 months down the line, or maybe even 10 years down the line, which is ultimately what we really want to see. And I do think the process of discovery is crucial in that, because the process is easier to go through rather than remembering a fact or a solution. So while you start engaging in solving a problem in the way you discovered it yourself, you can actually engage in that much faster. But that's, I just don't know. I don't know on that. But I would imagine that would be the way in which...
Many mathematical formulas that I have bad memory. I have to redo them myself using the, to get their using my way. Even quadratic, I can't remember how, by heart. I'll just do it.
I have a 15-year-old son, and we're going through, integers and derivatives, and only by doing the problem do I remember the general rule. But when you start to solve the problem, it all comes back to mind.
I totally agree that, the way is more important than the result in that case, and you can reproduce. Wonderful lecture. Thanks a lot. Be happy to see the...
And if anyone has any questions, I mean, my emails, I have multiple at this point, but I'm online somewhere. So just shoot me a message, and I will be very happy to get in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sid, did you have any last comments or questions?
Yeah, I'll ask, thank you. I'll ask 2 questions, but before that, Francesca, thank you very, very much, really. A great talk. So you don't have to answer the questions I'm going to ask. It's just something that just 2 things that came up that I was thinking about. One is that there's an assumption, and I'd really like to know a lot about the assumption, and that is that problem solving in games and problem solving in science, math, and reading, as it appears in PISA. So there's an assumption that there's an equivalence, or there's some kind of a connection between them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be looking at what you're looking at. And so it's of interest to me to know what are the kinds of problem solving that's going on in all those situations. There are 4 situations: games, but we don't know exactly what games the kids are using exactly, but gaming, and then science, math, and reading. So that's one thing that I was thinking about as you were talking. And a second is, and this is a different level of resolution, I don't know if you can really get at it or not, but I was interested in what is it that triggers strategy change. Somebody goes from one thing to another, from one way of thinking about things, or I'm doing data harvesting and now I'm gonna, I mean, they don't say it, but they're doing it, and then something happens and they switch to something else. And what those moments, those nodes, the places where change takes place, it would be, for me at least, I'd be interested in knowing what is it that triggers those kinds of strategy changes, both in gaming and also in science, math, and reading. But again, it might be just simply at a resolution that for the moment you don't have tools for measuring that, or maybe you do, but maybe you don't think it's all that critical, which is fine. So let me end the session with something, 2 things you said. You said a lot, but I'll tell you 2 in particular. I tell everybody about 2 in particular. So one is that Francesca once wrote to me about boredom, And it was something that I actually hadn't thought about very much. I've experienced it, but I haven't really thought much about it. And her insights into it were really remarkable. And this talk could never be put into the category of boring. It was innovating, it was multifaceted, it clearly presented great ideas, implications for education, which we're all interested in, and also implications for problem solving in areas like skills, and also skills among this, what interests people in at the AMMACHI Labs and the center, people learning skills for a purpose. And it's not just a game. The purpose is, if I learn these skills, I will be able to do something with the skills that will allow me to have income, or my family to have income. And so that's different than playing a game. It's also different in some ways than what you learn in school. You learn in school so you can get an okay grade or even an excellent grade, or if you're like me, to do the least to pass. And that was about it. That was my interest. So there's something very practical about learning skills among women in remote villages in India. So as I said, not boring at all. Innovating is really, I think, the word that would best describe the talk. And the second is that Francesca and I have written more than once about pomegranates, and she mentioned it. So she's from Italy, and pomegranates are native to Italy. And they're also native to Israel. So this is for the students, so you know what academic life can be like. And that is that before Corona, we had discussions about her coming to Israel and giving a series of lectures and having the opportunity for the two of us to talk about the work that we're doing. And what was important to us was the timing, and it had to be at the time when the pomegranate season was there, so that she wouldn't miss out on really good pomegranates, not the kind that you get in France, or at the time I think she was in England, but like, freshly harvested pomegranates. So, and there's an expression in Israel about some people, and that is that for those of you who've never seen pomegranates, there's huge, it's pink on the inside, and it has a huge number of seeds. And there's an expression that about a person, that their mind is like a pomegranate, in the sense that there's so much inside, so many seeds, so much knowledge, so much wisdom. And it's completely appropriate for you, Francesca, for the talk that you gave, wide-ranging. And every time that a question was asked, you had well thought out answers. And then there was a follow-up, and that had well thought out answers. So it's not endless, but it really is like the pomegranate seeds. So thank you very, very much. It was a wonderful talk. As you saw, there was great interest. People had all kinds of questions. So, there we go. Who put that up? Sur? Wow, there you go. And it's also healthy.
Yeah, to show the guys what we don't usually eat.
We have them here in India also, but I have to say the ones in Israel are much better.
Yeah, they're really, they're exceptional. So,
you got to work.
Francesca, thank you very, very much, really. And I think for those of you who want, Francesca made an offer, and that is that if you have questions, you can write to her. and I'm sure she'll be happy to answer whatever it is you have to, whatever you're asking. And I surmise that because otherwise she wouldn't have said, write to me if you want to know more about what it is that I'm doing. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Francesca.
Thank you so much.
And really fascinating.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, Francesca.
Emails, but sorry, I send the presentation. I have works in my house that starts at 10 a.m. sharp, so here they come.
Thank you.